I wanted to talk about Vaush's new take that has gotten pro-Ukraine Twitter angry at him. I saw Anastasia, a good friend of mine, actually gave me this nifty necklace. They were calling Vaush out on Twitter. I saw Laserpig reacting to it. What was that reaction image Laserpig used? I think it was from Animaniacs, I think. Yeah, Laserpig reacted with this image in response to Vaush's statement on orcs and the use of the term orcs. And it was not just them. It's a bunch of people in the pro-Ukraine space, including people based in Ukraine. It seemed like the vast majority of the fire being directed towards Vaush was negative from the pro-Ukraine camp. So I would say as of right now, it's Vaush v pro-Ukraine Twitter, which is interesting because like there are so many bigger like fish to fry when it comes to anti-Ukraine people. Vaush is somebody who supports aid to Ukraine. I know he supports aid to Ukraine. I know he supports aid to Ukraine because he doesn't have gravel between his knuckles from dragging them on the floor. And he's said it before. He supports Ukraine's struggle. But he's also gotten into a few tizzies with them before over like talk of Azov and him being like, oh, if Azov all died in combat, that would be cool. That would deal with two problems with once, basically. Birds, one stone. And that was something that did not sit well with a lot of people. But this is like the first time I've seen a lot of fire directed at Vaush in a long time. So instead of me just like reading a bunch of tweets from a bunch of pro-Ukraine people criticizing him, I wanted to just watch Vaush's original video that caused this reaction in the first place. Mind you, this is not technically the video that caused this reaction. The videos that are causing this reaction are clips of this, like a 58 second, 1 minute clip taken and then put on Twitter. And that's what I saw. And that's what I reacted to yesterday. And then I thought, that's probably not fair. It's probably not fair to react to a 58-second clip with everybody piling on Vaush when I can go watch the full context with him talking about, you know, what's happening and why he disagrees with calling the Russian orc. I can just listen to this directly. Now, before I give my take on it, I'm going to have Vaush give his take, and then I'll give my take on the use of the word orc. I can just put out there straight away that I don't use the term orc, and it's probably going to be for some of the same reasons Vaush does, but there's some distinctions and difference from the little clip that I did see that I want to make with Vaush, because I do think the little bit I did see that there is some hypocrisy at play. Now, he makes a distinction to try to say why it's not hypocrisy, but we'll get into it in a bit. We'll check it out.
Ukraine's kick-ass 3rd Assault Brigade have today captured dozens of... Guys, do not give me updates on the Russia-Ukraine war where they refer to Russians as orcs. Are you f***ing kidding me? I should find the person who linked this and ban them. Are you f***ing joking me? Are you kidding me?
Okay, so he's passionate about it. It's a ban hammer for linking something that calls the Russians orcs. And it seems like in this one too, if you check dozens of orcs during combat operations, this isn't like, I hear a lot of people say that orc means Russian ethnicity. If you're Russian, you're born in Russia, you are an orc. But this seems to be referring specifically to soldiers. Now, whether or not somebody is referring to all of Russians or just soldiers won't necessarily be clear. Like if they would only use it towards soldiers isn't necessarily clear from this tweet, but in this tweet, they are referring to the soldiers. Anyway, continuing.
Joking me? Are you kidding me? What does that mean? Use your head. Why not? Use your head. Is orc in this context a slur? Yeah, but my issue with it isn't that it's like racially insensitive, like as the word in its use or whatever. Like, think about it. Would you really trust any information coming from somebody who refers to the Russians as orcs? Like, use your head, man. Also, it's like they treat it like it's a race war. I'm really sorry, man. You know, Ukrainians and Russians, you two look the same to me, motherfucker. You're not gonna race war your way out of this one. You've got Russian Nazis who all think the Ukrainians are Jewish, and you've got Ukrainian Nazis who all think the Russians are Jewish. I'm sorry, man. You're both.
Is that what Ukrainian Nazis think? That the Russians are all Jews? In my experience, it's more about like they're the Hun. You know, it's they're an Asiatic horde. It's you know, they've got Tuvans, they've got these reindeer herders from tribes out east. They've got all these people that are not white, man. And so they don't vibe with that. At least that was the vibe that I've gotten from the actual Ukrainian Nazis that are in the country, which is, again, a very small minority in the country. Like, every country has Nazis. But that's what the read I got from them. Not much about Russians all being Jews. I mean, there is like a deep history in Russia of Judaism, but it's usually just pogrom after pogrom.
Sweaty, balding Slavic people to me, okay? Now go in the trenches. Get out there and settle your differences.
I mean, I guess I never talked about this specific. Maybe that's also a thing, but I just haven't seen it.
Slavic people to me, okay? Now go in the trenches. Get out there and settle your differences, which are very small. Sometimes it's good to do these bits once in a while, because every once in a while some Ukrainian nationalist will go on some tirade about how actually ethnically the Ukrainian people are descendant from like the heavens or whatever, and Russians are all pig people, and it's just a nice reminder that Nazism is a problem everywhere, you know? Yeah, I see you fucking Banderites. Happy birthday, Rikande then. Guys, don't defend the orc thing. Come on. Come on. It's definitely not a race thing, though. It's a behavior thing about Russian soldiers. Am I like racing back? Yeah, NAFO dogs the fuck out. It's about their behavior. Then use any one of the billion terms that you can use to refer to people who do war crimes, rather than orc, a term which is like literally you're a different race.
I mean, like, in the same way you might call like a cop a pig, but I mean, I guess you could say it's like dehumanized, but that would be in reaction to cop behavior. Like, oh, the cops, you know, it's a corrupt, or oh, the cops, you know, they're not in shape for the job. Oh, the cops are this or that. That would lead to somebody calling them a pig. Now I guess you can say that's also dehumanizing, because it's literally referring to them as an animal, but that would be in reaction to behavior, not their race. And in the vast majority of instances where I'm hearing the term orc used in Ukraine, it's in reaction to Russian soldiers, and it's in reaction to like, oh, they looted. Oh, orcs do what orcs do. Oh, they did this war crime. Oh, orcs gonna orc out, you know? Well, not exactly said that way, but in something like that. They don't say orcs gonna orc out. But if I use the term orc, that's how I would phrase it. It's orc in time. I don't know. But yeah, it's usually a reaction to behavior. Now, I'm not saying that nobody uses it as an idea of like all Russians are orcs. In fact, I will see like certain Russian civilians referred to as orcs, but even in those instances, a lot of times it's like, oh, look at these orcs, and I'll look, and it's the vilest, the most awful like telegram messages from Russian citizens calling for horrible things to be done to Ukraine, which I think evidently shows that there's a real problem with the dehumanization of Ukrainians in Russian political culture. There's a real issue with just the how permissible treating Ukrainians like subhumans is in Russia, or definitely when it comes to their media space and stuff like that. But I think the vast majority of it is a reaction to behavior. I do think that when some people used to it, it could be, it's that in that context, maybe the more like he's talking about like the Ukraino ultra-nationalist Banderites. I would say if somebody from right sector said orc, depending on the person in right sector, because Pravi sector has been diluted with other people from the regular armed forces. But if you're talking about some of the old guard Pravi sector and they used orc, it's going to be more likely that they're talking about it ethnically. It's going to be more likely that they're talking about, no, this is just how the Russians are. Something I'll hear more often about like Russians as a people is the mocking reference to the mysterious Russian soul. You know, the idea that the Russians are impossible to understand as a Westerner. Their, you know, their ways, their stoic ways, and dealing with tragedies is just, you know, as West, we just can't deal with it. And so it'd be the mysterious Russian soul. Westerners can't understand the mysterious Russian soul. And the way it was used as an insult is like anytime the Russians would do something absolutely stupid or insanely awful, they'd be like, ah, the mysterious Russian soul has shown itself once again. Say like, for example, there's like a terrible war crime committed, like Bucha, be like, ah, there's the mysterious Russian soul showing itself again. Or if there was like some terrible hate crime done in Kiev, I'm not Kiev, in like Moscow towards the LGBT people, like beaten in the street, ah, the mysterious Russian soul has once again face.
That's literally the term. Like that, it's like a billion in things you could say that aren't that, and to pretend that there's no like overlap between like racial or nationalist dogma and the use of the term orc. Come
By
on.
the way, I think the ironic use of the mysterious Russian soul is wittier than the use of, by the way. I do want to throw that out there. I do prefer that because I think it's funnier.
Nationalist dogma and the use of the term orc. Come on. Literally, like, you're not even human, you're a different type of person. Barbarian is defensible. Barbarians are
Now, to be clear, I've met Ukrainian soldiers that tell me that they don't believe the Russians are human. And then I'll ask why, and it's usually about like things that they've done in the country. I remember I was interviewing some drone teams attached to, I think it was the 54th, and it was a drone training operation. They were operating some agricultural drone that had been retrofitted to drop mines. It was like very interesting. And I sat down with one of the drone operators and I was asking question after question. I got like 20 minutes in. I only had like a few more questions left. And one of the guys we're with was apparently unsatisfied with the interview. And he said, like, you're not asking any hard questions. Ask him why he doesn't think the Russians are human. So immediately, like, I had to be like, oh, well, you guys want to take it that way? You really want to talk about it? As a journalist, I got to document it. So, like, dude, Russians are human. Then he went on a big diatribe about the awful things that the Russians have done, that they've lost their humanity through their bucha and through their atrocities. And so that sentiment does exist to some capacity among certain soldiers of the armed forces. And of course, there are those who go even further. That's just how the Russians are in their blood. Those are like the furthest of the far right in the Ukraine. I've not met many of them. But even those people, it's in reaction to behavior usually, not a race thing. And I think a big problem with convincing like everyday Ukrainians that they're Russians, or for them to even use it in that way, like ethnically or racially, they might have like comments on political culture, for example, like the difference between Ukrainian and Russian political culture, not like ethnically, because most of them have family members across the border. Some of them know family in Russia. Some of them, have spent time in Russia. Many of them have like intermingling of the families that was purposefully sponsored by the Soviet government to try to move Russians into Ukraine. So it's something that was both led by the government, both just because of their close proximity together. And so it's kind of hard for you to immediately then tell everybody you're superior to the people that your aunt has been banging forever, or it's not gonna work. Doesn't really, like, if I was like, oh, I'm superior to Tibetans, and like, oh my gosh, I'm so it's kind of hard for me to hold that position if my Meemaw has been dating a Tibetan for the last 20, 30 years.
Is a curd.
Human, sure, go for that one if you want to. I've said they're barbarous. Go for it, yeah. But like let's be real here. If you go on Twitter right now and you find the people who are like using the term orc over and over again, it's 100% either like someone who unironically spends a little bit too much time defending the Azov battalion, or 13-year-old Western non-credible defense guys who jerk themselves off raw to like grainy video footage of Vatniks being obliterated by drone strikes,
I mean, maybe in like the English speaking like Twitter space, that a lot of it is Westerners who I think are, can get a little weirdly like energized about watching somebody blow in half, I don't take any joy in watching people die. I take joy in like victories towards peace, victories towards liberation. I do not take joy in watching people die. I understand why people get some sort of release through watching those videos. I just can't get that because I don't know the person on the other side. If I know the person on the other side is like Prigozhin, then, maybe it'd be a lot easier. But it's hard to tell, especially when there's so much forceful conscription in occupied territory. But I mean, let me throw my take out there on Orc, because we're 3 minutes in and I want to make sure that my position's out there. I don't use the word Orc. It's purposeful on my part because what Vaush is talking about right now, while I don't think that's true for the majority of Ukrainians or the majority of people who use the term Orc, I do think that people can interpret it that way, as Vaush has and as other people have, especially Russians. Not that that's what is making me make this decision because of what the Russians think, but it can be interpreted that way. And I have a strong enough commitment personally to not engage in any dehumanizing language or language that could be somewhat credibly interpreted as dehumanizing, that I just don't want to engage in that rhetoric. And I think that there's more witty insults you could throw out there anyway. Personally, as well, I don't want to engage in a type of language that could disconnect the humanity from those acting the most inhumane. And it's not out of a desire to like love those committing these crimes. It's out of a desire that I don't want to lose connection with the fact that human beings committed all of the crimes that the Russians. Human beings committed Bucha. Human beings filled the largest mass grave since the Yugoslav genocides in Izium, over 440 bodies. Human beings executed those civilians. Human beings engaged in that beheading that we're now getting reports of. Human beings castrated Ukrainian soldiers. Human beings starved Ukrainian soldiers.
Morally corrupt,
human beings kidnapped Ukrainian children and then put them up for adoption without their family's consent in the Russian adoption system. Human beings did all of this. And if we, and I think by not distancing myself from that, I can better grapple with the fact that human beings did that, so we can try to make it so no human beings do that in the future. And by just simplifying it and saying, oh, they're evil, oh, they're orcs, oh, that's just orcs doing orc things, I feel like I'm distancing myself from the humanity of those who treat us in the most inhumane ways, because it's more complicated than just saying they're evil, but it does simplify it if you just say, well, they're evil, you know? So anyway, that's why I don't say it. Now, obviously, I'm a foreigner. I'm not watching my school get blown up. I'm not watching my village get blown up. I'm not watching my mom and dad and sons and daughters get killed. I'm watching my friends get killed. I'm watching, you know, this country that's extremely beautiful and is full of amazing people get bombed. I'm dealing with horrible experiences. I've been, you know, in aid groups that have been war crimed by the Russian army. You know, when we were in here sawing with the aid groups that have been bombed. I mean, bombing aid groups after blowing up a dam to flood the local communities. Rescue workers come to those communities and then you bomb them. It's just war crime stacked upon war crime stacked upon war crime, right? So, but at the end of the day, if I lived here and this was my community, I feel like I would have even more investment. Maybe my perspective would change, and maybe I would want release in a way to call them orcs. Anyway, let's continue. Let's keep listening to Vaush.
Yeah, it shows you where their principles are, Smerk, too. I'm not defending it, but why would Vaush, of all people, be opposed to calling people orcs when he says that all the time? When do I call Russians orcs? When do I do that? I say lots of things about lots of people. I don't broadly refer to members of an entire nation as orcs. I don't do that. I say that, like, the Hitlerite particle...
Has he never used the word orc before? Now, I do want to say, even if we could find some like old clip of him saying orc, at the end of the day, that doesn't change the argumentation at all. That would just mean like Vaush, how many months ago, much time ago. I mean, if it was like a month ago, it'd be pretty embarrassing. But however many years or months ago, said it, and now he thought about it again, and now he disagrees with it. I will say that if that is the case, immediately disregarding a report because somebody used the word orc would come off as more embarrassing. But I also understand the inclination. I would probably start with a more authoritative, credible, and known source for news updates outside of somebody who's like using those, because obviously like CNN ain't using orc, you know? It doesn't necessarily discredit the information because the person could just really not like the Russians. But anyway, yeah, it would be embarrassing for completely disregarding their commentary if he has said this before within the length of this war. But it wouldn't necessarily be a moment of hypocrisy if he's simply changed his mind since then and has now been revealed that, hey, I don't like this type of language about anyone, soldier, civilian, anyone.
But that's a criticism of their beliefs and ideology. I don't do that.
I don't hear people refer to Russian civilians as orcs. Again, I said this earlier, but I see that very rarely. And the only times I see that is when a Russian civilian goes like on Twitter and says that Bucha was cooler. Then you'll get that type of, oh, orc doing orc things. Here's the mysterious Russian soul. That's one you hear often. The Ruski Mir has come home again, the Russian world, you know? That's the type of stuff I will see. So orc can be included in that, but in most instances, I do not see that being referred to civilians.
Hogs. Sometimes I've called conservatives hogs. But that's not me saying that they're like, that's like hog. That's like a common cop refrain, like pigs. That's not literally like they're not people. It's a reuse or a recontextualization of centuries old class dynamicism. When you call the bourgeoisie pigs, you're not literally like dehumanizing them. That's not how the rhetoric is employed. It's just like,
what? Really? You're not?
an animalization, or what is it? No, it's the opposite of an anthropomorphization.
But this feels just like cope to me. Like, I don't know. Like, it just feels a little bit like cope. Like, I mean, there's a difference between immutable characteristics, right? If somebody's born in Russia, they can't control that. I guess you can be born into wealth, but then you can give away your wealth if you want. But then again, I guess you could move out of Russia and then like be like, I'm Romanian now, I hate Russia. But there's a lot more, I guess, more effort in that than necessarily giving away all your money. But again, I don't think I think these distinctions are like somewhat important, but I don't think it takes away any element of hypocrisy. Like, oh, I don't like dehumanization. Dehumanization's bad, but it's okay to call these people animals, pigs, because there's like a social political context. Well, I think there's a social political context behind the calling of Russians orcs as well. It's the fucking war, you know?
It's obviously not the same. I don't know about that one, Chief. I mean,
once again, it's mostly used against soldiers, and so if it's a question of like immutable characteristics, you can choose to be a soldier. I mean, you can be conscripted too, but in draft dodge.
Burns is an immoral,
morally corrupt, bankrupt man. AGAX21. Thank you so much for the subarino and being sub for 9 months. I appreciate that. Well, I think as usual, people are hating Vaush and not his comments. I thought he had a point, but can't deny Ukrainians have a point in calling them orcs too. Like I'm trying to be super fair here, okay? I'm trying to be super fair here. I know Vaush. I know pro-Ukraine Twitter. I think they know me. I hope they don't hate me. And so I'm trying to kumbaya drum circle this shit. I'm doing my best here. See, I agree personally, principally, on not using these terms because of just how some people could even interpret it. If nobody could interpret it in a dehumanizing context for all Russians, then I would feel perfectly comfortable using the term all the time. Because number one, I love J.R.R. Tolkien now because I watched Lord of the Rings and that stuff was fire. And number two, they do act brutish, the Russian soldiers. They do commit war crimes like crazy. They do bomb and destroy everything in sight, at least in my experience, right? So again, if we're restricting this to a profession, we're saying it's okay because they're ultra rich, kind of like it's not an immutable characteristic. I would say for the majority of people, they would be using it in a way that would fall within Vaush's guidelines of what is okay, since he's okay with calling the capitalist pigs or cops pigs.
I don't need to argue with you. I have the like incredible power of just banning people. If you really think that like Azov jerking off Twitter accounts calling every Russian an orc is the same as like saying cops are pigs or the bourgeoisie are pigs.
Well, it's a little, I mean, again, the tweet that set this off was a guy calling Russian soldiers orcs, not every Russian an orc. I don't think it's impossible to find that. There are like far-right Ukrainian maniacs, right? They do exist, right? Some of them just held an anti-gay rally in Kiev. Most of them looked like preteens and like people in their very early 20s. Like most of them look younger than me, and I'm 23. So they do exist. But then again, Kiev Pride, which was a closed event, got like triple, quadruple, or like 5 times what they were able to turn out. I think more than 5 times because it was a closed event for 500 people. And this counter protest had like maybe 60, 70, even though the Russian Volunteer Corps was pushing it hard.
So you can just like leave the chat. I don't care. I'm not going to argue with an unreasonable position from someone acting disingenuously. I'm not going to pretend that your position is like worth consideration. Attacking a class position or a job with like a historical allegory to a pig, like someone who is greedy, like who eats up all the money. Well,
the allegory would be the orcs, which destroy, pillage, burn, and act with savage nature, towards the people they are wronging. And Lord of the Rings, it was hobbits and humans, and this world, it'd be, I guess, Ukraine.
That's comparable to referring to a whole nation of people as orcs? Come on. Holy shit. You guys read way the too much NAFO shit, man. I'm really sorry. What is NAFO? Keep that energy. Never learn. I'm sorry, I thought the tweet was about soldiers, not Russians in general.
I will say, while NAFO was cringe and will always be cringe from the start to the end of all time in existence, they do support Ukraine like crazy. I mean, I'll see like these NAFO dog accounts be like, I just took my retirement savings and just donated $30,000 to so and so, and then all the NAFO accounts will be like in the replies, like doing like a blood ritual to bring about the death of Surovikin and Sergei Shoigu and Strelkov and Putin and all of them. And like they go crazy, okay? I mean, I see more than you would think of vehicles used by the armed forces in this country with a big old NAFO sticker on the side of it. I tried to take a picture of one like 2 days ago that I saw, but I couldn't for OPSEC reasons. But I mean, it was hooked up with jamming equipment, like a ton of jamming equipment, actually. It had like a million different NAFO dogs on it. The guys might have been annoyed at having to drive around a vehicle covered in dumb cartoon dogs, but at the end of the day, they have a decent vehicle.
Ambiguously employed. And I also don't think it leads you to very good opinions.
Apparently, I was in a different NAFO group than where Dylan is because I didn't see stuff like that. I have seen NAFO people in the retirement years or older NAFO people who have a lot of money, or maybe not even a ton of money, but like really digging into their savings. Because in their mind, it's like, this is a struggle for national survival. The more equipment I give them, the less civilians are going to have to feel Russian occupation, the less civilians are going to get. And so they get very emotionally invested, and then they start giving more and more and more and more and more. And I've seen it happen more than once. And I'm not saying it's necessarily bad. It just, you know, that type of compassion can be, it can be self-destructive, financially at least.
Like a lot of the Russian soldiers are just conscripts. Yeah, a lot of them act monstrously, but it's a product of material conditions, social circumstances. You know, I don't think you're getting anything out of that, like that mentality. Dehumanizing rhetoric is like, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I'm above it all or whatever. You know, I've thrown out some zesty ones to be sure, but I really take issue with these like normalized trend in a conflict of like, oh yeah, those are the orcs or.
There are conscripts in the Ukrainian and the Russian army. I don't know if I would use the word a lot. I mean, if there's thousands of them, I would say thousands of people are a lot, but we're talking relative to the Russian army. They certainly exist. Definitely in occupied territory, but that's the stuff that's honestly the saddest. People in occupied Ukraine getting forcibly conscripted into the Russian armed forces, even though it's illegal under all international norms and laws to conscript occupied people. They do it anyway because they don't, from Russia's perspective, Moscow, from Putin's perspective, it isn't occupied territory. Russia, in their mind, they can conscript, they can take people, they can do all they want, they can take as many people as they want, and that leads to some very, very sad stories.
Or whatever, you know, it's not just like referring to them euphemistically in like a specific circumstances too, right? It's not like, oh, at Bucha.
He's talking about mobilized Russians. Yeah, he's talking about the Russians that were mobilized and conscripts and such. I don't think there's a majority, but there's certainly a sizable portion.
Like they were like orcs slaughtering people or whatever. It's not like in a specific circumstance. It's just like in general for years now, just they're orcs. And yeah, the vibes are off, man.
By the way, this might be hard for somebody to wrap their mind around, but the majority of Russians invading Ukraine have consciously made the decision to sign up with the Russian army and invade Ukraine. Now, that doesn't mean they're all doing it for deep patriotic reasons. In fact, many of them are doing it for financial difficulties and try to solve those by getting the large cash payments that they're going to get from the Russian army and all the other benefits that they offer.
It's just like in general for years now, just they're orcs. And yeah, the vibes are off, man. Bro, don't pretend they don't intend there to be like this is some new iteration of Clean Wehrmacht. I'm not entirely sure what you mean, XKCKQ. Who's doing the Clean Wehrmacht thing? So when you said it was in specific circumstances?
Oh, so Clean Wehrmacht, for those of you who don't know, there's this idea and like World War II revisionism that's like, oh, SS was terrible. Very bad. But the Wehrmacht, oof, they were those who loved their country, did it for good reasons, and they did not commit war crimes because they just wanted to see Germany prosper. It's nonsense. The Wehrmacht were deeply involved. If you could not be in the Soviet Union invading it and not have seen war crimes. Just statistically, there are very few people who have not seen war crimes, present for war crimes happening, or in some way did not facilitate it. Wehrmacht soldiers were very much involved. That doesn't mean all Wehrmacht soldiers were involved, but many of them were. Many of them were given orders to participate in operations that were very much war crimes, very much targeted minority groups, and they did it in large part. Not in every single instance. Sometimes they disobey orders. There were some instances that they could, and this is the scary thing. In instances where Wehrmacht soldiers were ordered to commit like horrific war crimes and they just refused to do it, there was not really any punishment associated with that, which is really scary because that means that they just said no and they were like, okay, I guess we're not doing this today, or they had to go find somebody else to do it, and then they just went about their business, meaning that probably almost all of them could have just said no. At least in the Wehrmacht.
Everything that I do is a specific circumstance. That's how circumstances work. What are you trying to gotcha? You're trying to gotcha me for? Why don't you, instead of trying to like, you're saying like this you, and it's like a picture of me being beautiful, like handsome Squidward.
To be clear, do I think Vaush is doing the clean Wehrmacht thing here? No, I don't think he's doing that. I think you can acknowledge that the Russian army is full of a lot of conscripts. A lot of conscripts. While not necessarily wiping the conscripts of, because conscripts commit war crimes too. Conscripts put in a really terrible situation can also loot, can also pillage, can also commit war crimes. They can do all those things as well, and they have.
Burns is an immoral, morally corrupt.
But I don't think he's engaging in clean Wehrmacht. I think he's just saying that there's a lot of people in an unfortunate circumstance due to the material conditions they have been conscripted, which is true. That doesn't mean that they couldn't have ran away or stuff like, but these aren't people marching to the beat of Putin's drum with a smile on their face.
How circumstances work. What are you trying to gotcha? You're trying to gotcha me for? Why don't you, instead of trying to like, you're saying like this you, and it's like a picture of me being beautiful, like handsome Squidward. Instead, why don't you try to focus on like what I'm saying? You know? You're never going to understand anything in life if all you're doing is trying to find gotchas in people's positions by like ineptly comparing one thing to another thing and not understanding the broader point between them.
Oh, second, we've got another donation. Isn't it hypocritical when woke Americans soy out about a tiny minority of the far right in Ukraine while going all out to defend the many Islamists in Palestine? To make a long answer short, yes.
What are you even referring to? Do you remember a specific instance of me saying that Russians are orcs? Like, or what are you comparing it to?
That doesn't mean that neither liberation struggle like, it's just if we applied this to any other country, this logic, like it's different when it's like a ruling party and it's like, obviously there's like dynamics to it that can change it.
Calm it down. Isn't that what debating is? To a lot of people, yes. If a Palestinian called the IDF orcs, we would defend that. No, I really wouldn't. I've said a lot of shit about the IDF, and you'll notice that I tend to avoid that rhetoric. Again, I'm not going to pretend I'm perfect. I say a lot of shit. I'm talking about a broader tendency. I don't know why you're trying to do the whataboutism to defend it, man. Like, what's the obsession with calling Russians orcs?
Okay, so I would vibe with this a lot more, and I'm saying this because I'm in the camp of I don't use orc, right? I'd vibe with this a lot more if it wasn't like, hey, I'm against this, just, you know, like if you listen to how he's talking about this right now.
I'm not going to pretend I'm perfect. I say a lot of shit. I'm talking about a broader tendency. I don't know why you're trying to do the whataboutism to defend it, man.
Like if he just said like, I don't like that this guy used the word orc in his report, that'd be one thing, but he completely disregarded his report because of it. So it's if we're just talking about, oh, well, you know, I'm not perfect, but then I, for example, disregard what Vaush has said because of his previous use of the word orc, or his previous use of any other word that could have been dehumanizing if I could dig something up. I don't know. It just feels, is this performative? I don't think it's performative. I think he believes what he believes. I can feel a genuineness. See, I'm going to do what Bush did. I looked into his eyes. I saw a good man. A good man.
Like, what's the obsession with calling Russians orcs? Call them a million other bad things. Like, seriously, it's not that hard. Well, if they're settlers, they're settlers.
The Aqua Orcs thing is a joke about Vaush doing a stupid point saying water across the border is aqua with Mexico. I mean, water across the border, I guess, is aqua. Seems like a science point to me.
I don't think it's worth worrying about now. I do think we need to condemn it if it continues after the war. Love your work, Dylan.
Thank you very much for the 10-pounder Reno. Aqua is, water is aqua across the border. That's, I mean, good. Hey, it's got a point there. Vaush is making some strong scientific discoveries. Thank you for the $10. I do appreciate that. If it could, I mean, it would depend. When people say if it continued after the war, Russia isn't just like, this isn't the only bad thing Russia has or will do. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Russia has done a lot of really bad things in the last 20 years. Decimated Chechnya twice, invaded Georgia in 2008, supported one of the most brutal dictators in the Middle East, Bashar al-Assad, in the butchering of his own people, and used UN data given to them by the United Nations to avoid bombing hospitals to bomb hospitals, right? Like, they have done horrible. I mean, they even like showed bombing of hospital footage as demonstration footage in order to show off the effectiveness of their bombs to international investors trying to purchase from the Russian arms market. Like, horrible things. And unless there is a gigantic sea change in not only Russian leadership, but Russian political culture, there's a good chance that after this war, that you know, there's going to be still brutish behavior from the Russian army. Whether if it's the ultra-nationalists taking over and turning it all up to, they're already at 11, so I guess 12. Whether it would be, let's say there's another protest movement in Belarus, and so they send in the army again to kill some more protesters and do horrible stuff. But I do agree with the general premise that we should not be labeling all Russians as orcs, labeling all Russians as inherently bad. Nobody should be condemned solely due to their place of birth and due to factors completely outside of their control. I know some really good Russian activists living in Ukraine who are against the war, doing great work. I know other Russians that are also, you know, doing good work fighting against the regime. I don't know many. I think that's possibly because I'm working in Ukraine, not Russia, and not other locations. And like, I cannot tell you that the majority of Russians are like hardcore anti-Putin people waiting for the chance of revolution. But no one should be condemned ever just for their place of birth.
It's also 47. The IDF is also made up of conscripts. It's not about whether or not they're conscripts. It's that the only reason you would use orc is if you're trying to dehumanize. And I just think that tends to lead to bad analysis. You can insult a group of people, Hitlerite, lunatics, war crime loving, bloodthirsty, all terms that I've used. They're all mean.
Yeah, but orc is supposed to like take all this together and be like, see, they're acting like the evil guy in the movie. They're doing all of these bad things together.
Warranted, I think.
Like when people referred to, I think it was the Germans. Did we refer to the Germans as the Hun? I think it's what we referred to. We referred to them as the Hun, which, by the way, rolls off the tongue very well. I understand why people use that. But was that like, would we consider this of the same vein?
Given the behavior of the IDF and the Russian military, I just don't like the orc thing. I only remember you calling the Russian army orcs. I genuinely don't remember.
A curd is a curd.
Doing that. If I did, okay. I don't know what that has to do with what I'm saying right now. I've streamed thousands of hours. I'm sure I've said lots of stuff. Can you understand the point I'm making now? If I said that before, then I disagree with it now. Is that what you want? Sure. Like, do you think that invalidates a point? Little do you know, 3 years ago, in a moment of frustration, you said this. Okay, that was bad then. What do you want from me?
Also, I do want to make a distinction between Vaush's experience and my experience. My experience is on the ground in Ukraine talking to the Ukrainians. So when I hear orc, I'm mostly hearing it out of the mouth of Ukrainians. This is what I'm talking about when I hear that usage. I don't spend a ton of time hanging out with people online who use that term a lot. I mean, there are people that I know that use it that are Westerners, but most of the people I hang out with are Ukrainians. And I think the metrics of like how many are calling all Russian orcs, how many calling the army orcs, it might be different when it comes to Westerners, but I would assume that there would be a predisposition due to like obviously the on the ground hatred that comes with being war crimed, for people here to say, oh, the Russians are like not human. Oh, the Russians are all a bunch of animals. And I've run into that before, not in the idea that we literally think that they are like sub, but in the idea that they're animalistic in their nature, animalistic in the way that they behave, stuff that I'm still very uncomfortable with. I've heard that you would think that'd be more likely in the armed forces, or more likely in Ukraine, since they're the ones being war crimed, than those out there in the West, sitting comfortable, far away. Then again, a lot of the people in the West who are watching this, and I hate to say this, a lot of them are doing it for, I think, not a lot. I think that there are definitely some who do it for entertainment purposes. They enjoy watching war. They get some thrill out of it. They get some enjoyment out of it. Maybe they would use it at a higher rate. All I'm getting at here is that I don't know how much more tremendously the people that Vaush is communicating with would use the term orc to mean all Russians, compared to the people I'm meeting on the ground here, who I would think would have more of a grounds to even think that way, since due to their personal experience. The same way that I would imagine some random villager in Vietnam who just had their village burnt down for the third time by napalm have more of a reason to call Americans like, imperialist pig dog, or like some other insult, I don't know, compared to someone at Berkeley who doesn't approve of the war.
Jesus, that Vaush doesn't exist anymore. I am alive now. I'm saying this now. Who is Vaush? I'm condemning this person. Yeah, I think dehumanizing rhetoric just leads to really bad analysis for the most part. I think you called US cops orcs, not the Russians. Do you think that's better? Well, for one, that's a profession, not like, I don't know, the other army.
Soldier is a profession.
For two, I don't remember saying that. I tend to say hogs or pigs. For three, yeah, I do think that's better. There's not like a broader racial slash...
Well, I don't know. Orcs are at least humanoid. Pigs walk on all fours. I'm being a little too literal here.
For three, yeah, I do think that's better. There's not like a broader racial slash national movement concerned with discriminating against that group. Or
is there a broader racial, is there a discriminatory movement against the Russians? Is there like a movement to discriminate against Russia? Is Vaush saying Russophobia is like a real problem? Let me listen to this again. I don't want to misinterpret what he's. Good faith, Andy. Okay.
I don't know, the other army. For two, I don't remember saying that. I tend to say hogs or pigs. For three, yeah, I do think that's better. There's not like a broader racial slash national movement concerned with discriminating against that group, whereas there are literally like massive swaths of Ukrainians who absolutely would like exacerbate this as a fundamental ethnic conflict rather than a national one.
A massive swath of Ukrainian society. Ethnic conflict. What would it be a massive swath as an ethnic conflict, not a national conflict? That Russians as a group are evil and not human. Honestly, most soldiers I have interviewed, and I asked them, what do they think about the Russians? Most of the time, I get an answer like, either I get an answer like, they'll interpret the question as like, oh, they're smart soldiers, or, they're not as stupid as the media say, something like that, talk about them as an enemy. But most of the time I've asked this question, I've gotten an answer of like, it's sad that they're here. It's sad we have to kill them. It's sad that the situation is as it is. I think only once or twice I've gotten an answer that is akin to, they're not human. And the one time being that recent 54th interview with the drone training teams. I mean, like, most of the Russophobia, quote unquote, that gets talked about in the media anyway isn't even like interviews where they say stuff like that. It's, here's an offensive patch one of them were wearing. This one looks like a German eagle where they replaced the swastika with the Kiev coat of arms, the Ukrainian coat of arms, the trident.
None of this applies to the police. You can just stop being a cop, Like, the problem here is people exacerbating this into a greater ethnic conflict, which ideally you should prevent this, if at all possible. And even then, I don't remember saying that, man. Why are you... Is it like you think I've had a delectable little treat and you're trying to like... You're like, well, why did your mom let you have 2 hot dogs? I know you've called cons orcs, but that's deserved. Okay, fine. I'll go off on all of you, okay? This is one of the reasons why I don't do debates anymore. None of you motherfuckers think. You put no effort into engaging with a broader idea, not even a modicum of good faith. You're not even debating against me, motherfucker. You're in my chat. This isn't a competition. A lot of you don't put the effort in. You don't think, what point is being made? Are there contradictions? Oftentimes there are. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. Sometimes I say one thing, but I mean another. Sometimes I misspeak entirely. Sometimes I just do things that I will later disagree with. I don't pretend to be perfect. I would never ask any of you to think of me that way, but it is a little bit frustrating when I'm making what I think is a pretty clear and simple point against dehumanization, and people in chat are acting like, well...
This would be so much easier for him if he just like didn't call anyone pigs or didn't call anyone animals or didn't engage in any what would be considered another, I guess, other context, and I would also say this context, as dehumanizing language. It would make his job a lot easier.
Against a human.
That's my position. Like, I don't try to call anyone pigs. I don't try to call anyone rats. I'll like say things under my breath and I'll catch myself because these type of terms, like, oh, you're a rat, has a type of connotation about like sneakiness and slyness that doesn't necessarily communicate to you're trying to dehumanize them, but can communicate into you're trying to imply something about their character traits, which also I would say for the people describing Russian soldiers in this way is how orc is being used.
Humanization, and people in chat are acting like, actually in a July 2022 VOD, you claimed, I don't care. I don't. And your obsession with that as like a metric for opposing what I'm saying now is intellectually dishonest. It's silly. Don't you actually me?
Again, as he's pointed out, cops can quit, Russian soldiers can't. Many of them can. I mean, it's if you're like conscripted, it's different. And once you've signed the contract, it can be difficult to get out, but you cannot renew your contract and you cannot enlist. And that's the majority of the Russian army that has those choices. You can not renew your contract or not enlist in the first place.
It betrays an unwillingness to engage with the point. You're my roommate. You never wash your damn dishes. They stink up the sink. I point at it and I say, hey, you know, man, you should wash your dishes. You know, we share this household. We should both put some effort in. And you say, 7 months ago, there was a 3-day period during which you...
By the way, Vaush should do debates again. I just want to throw that out there, that Vaush's like debate content is like a lot of what his audience loves. What I love to watch. If he's not getting fulfillment out of it, then at the end of the day, you have one life, use it wisely, try to find joy in it. Everybody's trying to deal with mortality in different ways, and we have decided to deal with it by streaming. So if he doesn't find fulfillment in it, then it is what it is. But if there is any fulfillment to be had in it, it certainly is. Certainly, his audience likes it. Other people like to watch it. I don't know. I think I think it'd be good in doing some debate content, at least some. I mean, that's how so many people in his audience found him in the first place. And plus, it's election season. If there was a time to do debate content, it'd be as November was coming around the corner.
You're my roommate. You never wash your damn dishes. They stink up the sink. I point at it and I say, hey, you know, man, you should wash your dishes. You know, we share this household. We should both put some effort in. And you say, 7 months ago, there was a 3-day period during which you left a bowl that you had eaten chili out of in the sink. You didn't even rinse it out. It smelled bad. What about that? And to this, my response is, find a new roommate. I am evicting you. Get out of my house. Get out of my house. I hate you. Leave. Yeah, I know that guy. Yeah, I know that guy too because he's in my f***ing chat. And there are multiple of him. Just call them Hitlerites like Zelensky just did Lamau. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I do think that if he had a more consistent standard about like the use of these types of words, and I know like the words rat and pig can imply different things about gluttony, but I think Ukrainians could argue easily the same thing about orc. If he had a more consistent policy on this, or like a consistent stance on this, but then maybe it'd be easier. On the other hand, these are probably positions that are developed as we go, because, you know, he probably never thought about using the term orc before it was being used in this war, and as the war's gone on, he's probably thought more and more about it until he's reached this position. So, you know, maybe it's taking time for his, you know, kind of his mouth to catch up with his action, with his thoughts, which is a real thing that happens because, you know, you need time to, you cannot assume that all you streamers just know everything at once. Everybody's growing. Vaush is growing. I'm growing. Destiny's growing. Hassan's growing. Everybody grows as they stream and learn different things. So I would assume that like a lot of this is happening internally, and he's kind of expressing that externally now. I will also throw out there, like, I don't know what he means by large swaths of the Ukrainian population. I just don't know what he means by large swath. If he means like 20, maybe 25, we're really stretching, percent, maybe. But I do not think most Ukrainians view this as an ethnic conflict. In fact, I see that type of language used probably more on the Russian side. People can fact check me on that if they don't agree with me, but I've seen the kind of definition of an ethnic conflict a lot on the Russian side too, or if not more on the Russian side. Man, not saying that he is saying that they don't do that. But anyway, I don't really have much more to say. I think I've expressed everything I have to express about this. What do you guys think about this? Let me ask you guys quick before we move on. Dylan Burns, what is the best way to support you? DylanBurns.tv, you can become a renewing sub to the channel. That both supports me and it supports the people who manage my channel with me. Like Danabo, who helps edit my content. And it helps me pay for on-the-ground war journalism. If that doesn't work and you don't want to have a renewing subscription or don't want to donate some money, then you can also go to DylanBurnsTV on Patreon and become a supporter there. I also accept Prime subs on Twitch and YouTube. I'm remonetized again, so I'll take your super chat. Why not? I never watched Lord of the Rings until I was in Ukraine, and I got ambushed by Anastasia. I went to Kharkiv to film something. I forget what it was. And I went over to her house to hang out for a bit, and then she ambushed me, didn't tell me, with the extended edition of Lord of the Rings. And we watched every movie except the last one, which I then had to go and off and watch on my own.